What's going on? This is Joel Negus, and I am stoked to be doing a breakdown of a performance that I did a few months back. This was with a dance company in town called Inlet Dance Theatre. They're phenomenal. I'm stoked to be doing some more work with them right now. I'm doing a project with them. And I'm really excited to break down this performance. This was a pretty special performance. I was thankful to be included in it. This was Inlet's kind of gala, big show of the year. It was at a local stage that I love and have seen a number of shows at, called Kane Park, right here where I live in Cleveland Heights. So it's a special show. And what I want to aim at for this video is a couple of things. One is how I prepared to do a gig like this, and we'll talk more about what kind of gig it was. And then two, how I kind of, the technical aspects of how I accomplished doing what I was doing. So first, why don't we just listen to a little bit of this? I'm going to pull it up on Spotify, which you can too. Or if, you're cool, you want to do it on Bandcamp, it's there too. But let's just pull this up. This was a recording from that performance. So what was this performance? Going into this is what I knew. I was going to be doing an improvisation with all of the dancers on stage. That's pretty much it. And part of why I brought the instruments that I brought, namely mostly kind of modular, semi-modular synthesizers, was because of the improvisatory nature of those instruments. I wanted to bring things that were kind of gonna keep things open for me. So I didn't know a lot of what was gonna happen with the music that was being made because I had no idea what the dancers were gonna do. But the way that it worked in the performance, Bill, the director, asked a number of audience members, I think 3 audience members, to give a gesture to the dancers, and the dancers took those gestures and kind of built off of them and used that as inspiration, and then also just listening to what I was doing, and then of course I was watching them and responding to them and reacting to them. So it was kind of this whole experience with the audience and with me making music and with them dancing on stage. It was a really neat thing. So what I want to talk about today is how I prepared for something like this. How do you prepare for a gig that's fully improvised, right? Some of you, if you're like jazz musicians, you're like, yeah, that's the gig. That's what you do. But for a lot of people, improvisation isn't like a normal part of their thing. If you're a producer and you're mostly making sounds in the studio, I get that. A lot of my work changed in the pandemic, where it was mostly performing in the past, and then the pandemic hit and it kind of shifted pretty dramatically to making a lot of music here in the studio. So how did I prepare? How did I get ready to do a gig like this? Well, the first thing I want to talk about is the voices. So I didn't necessarily know what was going to happen and how like the overall piece was going to be structured, but I did have an idea of the kinds of voices that I wanted to have. So the one conversation that Bill and I had going into this was saying, I asked him, what's the vibe? What are we going for? And he said kind of fun, whimsical, were words that and then also driving. Okay, so those are the words that I was working with, and I wanted to play with those ideas as I was preparing different voices. Now, quickly, what do I mean by voices? Because I'm using all synthesizers here, synthesizers have a beautiful ability to create lots of different kinds of sounds. And that's basically what we mean by voices. So there are a number of different voices. There are different number of different sound sources that are doing different things. So starting with the first one here, we can start at the top. I'll pull this up on Spotify. But here's what started at the top. This is the first voice that I was thinking about. And this is the Harmonicon. This is this guy right here. The Harmonicon is one of my favorite synthesizers because it is so unpredictable. I tell people all the time, the Harmonicon is not the synth that you go to when you have an idea in your head. It's the synth that you go to when you need inspiration. And I wanted to use this voice to kind of be the main character of this piece. I had this kind of fun and whimsical sort of feel to it. There's a randomness to the rhythm. And it started off the piece, and I think I'm running this through the Von Gogh Ultra Shear, which is like my main reverb pedal. I love it. I put it on like everything. But that's the first thing. The second thing you hear is this. And this actually was this module right here, made by Mutable Instruments, called Beads. Beads is this really interesting texture synthesizer where you put audio going into it, and then it creates these really kind of, you can do a lot of different things to manipulate the sound of the audio going into it. And so actually this was like a brand new module to me at the time. I didn't really know what I was doing much with it. I hadn't watched a lot of tutorials, but I did kind of just throw some ideas into it, and this kind of robotic, kind of spacey, weird sound was what came out. And I thought it was just kind of playing more into that, like, just it's fun. It's an interesting idea. Now there's also, next to the beads, is this make noise Morphogene. The Morphogene, think like a reel-to-reel, like back there, right? There's a reel-to-reel back there. The Morphogene is basically taking the functions of a reel-to-reel and putting it into a modular synthesizer. And just also quickly, if this is the first time you even heard like the term modular synthesizer, the quickest way to explain what modular is take this huge synthesizer right in front of me, the Polybrute. There are a bunch of modules that are on the inside of this synthesizer, and they're all wired together and they do particular things. And that's awesome because Arturia made a beautiful synthesizer here. What modular is basically taking all of those modules that make up the insides of a synthesizer and putting them outside on a rack or in a skiff, and then allowing you to patch how these modules are routed. So basically, it's just giving you total freedom to decide what is the signal flow and how are you using these modules. And what's cool about modular is that you can use the same module in tons of different ways. And so in this case, I was using the Morphogene, taking actually the sound of the subharmonicon and putting it into the Morphogene, hacking it up a bit. And then what ended up happening was this kind of sound that I ended up using as a riser before the drums came in. This is what it sounded like. All right, this kind of weird sound that's rising and rising. And then, funny enough, so I needed drums. I wanted drums because driving was one of the words that I was going into it with. And so, funny enough, one of my first synthesizers, actually my first synthesizer, was actually a pocket operator that my brother gave to me a few years back. And I ended up getting a couple more of those, and I used the pocket operator drum as my kick for this whole thing. So a little weird for me. I don't normally do that, especially when I'm using all like analog stuff. But like I just love the sound of the kick, and so I threw it on there. So after that riser, we have this big release. This is what it sounds like with that kick. Kind of on a cool beat. And then after that, let's keep this thing driving. You gotta have a snare if we're gonna drive. Throwing in the Moog D-Fam, that's this guy right here. Woo! I absolutely love the D-Fam. And then the kind of other auxiliary hits, those are all D-Fam. And then the other thing you may have heard just come in, that is the Mother 32, right there, this guy. And the function of that voice is really simple. All I was trying to do is just have like a drive-in bass line that was kind of going the whole time. It was kind of a set and forget sort of synth where I have those eighth notes bumping, bump, 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 just driving the whole time. I think near the end maybe I changed the notes a couple of times, but besides that, that's about all I used it for, was just to keep it driving and have a bass function. And then lastly, kind of my performance instrument, and this was a big part of the concept for me, was I need to have an instrument that's gonna be one of my main improvising instruments. Now, I am not really a keyboard player. I'm a bass player. That guy. I'm an upright bass player. That's my main instrument. I play some other things, but really I'm an upright bass player. So it was definitely a stretch for me to play to do an improvised gig on a keyboard instrument. But I think part of what makes these instruments so inspiring is that you don't have to be an amazing keyboard player to make some really compelling sounds, I think. And so this next thing you hear coming in here, this is what the Polybrute sounds like. This is my main polyphonic synthesizer that I was using. This is what it sounds like. So it's a polyphonic synthesizer, but I was using it as a monophonic synthesizer, as a lead, and it doesn't mean lead sound. You have 6 oscillators on this thing, all in unison, kind of detuned a little bit there, and some really cool sounds, I think, coming out of it. So that was how I prepared. Those were the voices that I had prepared. So I kind of had an idea of the different functions of those voices and how they were going to serve the overall piece and what could be built together. I will say that we did a run through, the day before in a dress rehearsal, and it was like completely different. I think it was a different tempo. Like it was not the same, but I still used the same voices, and this is what ended up coming out at the performance. So that's how I prepared. And then also just like preparing as an improviser, I wanted to create a space where I felt comfortable being able to interact with other people. That was the goal. So I wanted to be able to know exactly what was going to happen if I turned that knob. I wanted to make sure that I was comfortable, which is in part why I didn't have a crazy extensive modular system. I just had a kind of a small skiff that was helping me control the Moog rack, because I'm a lot more comfortable with the Moogs. The Moogs are kind of like my gateway into modular synthesizers. I got these 3 Moogs, the diaphragm, the Modular 32, and the Harmonicon, and they were kind of what pushed me into modular synthesizers. I've heard that that's true for a lot of people. It's a semi-modular system, so you don't have to patch things in order for sound to come out, but you can patch things, and it makes it all the more versatile. So those instruments are unbelievable. Anyways, how did I route everything? So a couple quick things just about those modules. I already talked about beads and Morphogene. The rest of the skiff really wasn't being used. You could see right here, I have the IntelliGel Metropolix. And that was my sequencer, but honestly, I wasn't using I was probably using 1% of its capabilities. I didn't end up, for this performance, I think that the day before I used it a lot more, but for this performance, I didn't end up really using it for anything more than just a clock. So it's a really expensive clock. You shouldn't do that. Anyways, by clock, I mean I'm taking the BPM that I set on the sequencer, and I'm sending that out through patch cables into the different synthesizers. So it's going into the Harmonicon, into the Modular 32, and into the diaphragm. It's also going into, it's out of the picture here, but my pocket operator is right over here, and I had the clock going into the pocket operator as well. So then how did I route it in terms of sound? Honestly, I felt like I was doing something a little bit risky, but this is the way that I ended up wanting to do it. I worked with some really cool people at Kane Park. The audio engineers, they were awesome, really easy to work with. But basically, I asked for 2 DIs, and I ran straight out of my Apollo. So I basically dismantled my studio here. I took my Apollo, I took the satellite, and then I took over here the 4710D from UAD, and that's kind of the brains of my studio here at home. And so I ended up taking that out, putting it in a rack. So I had 2 channels on the Apollo, and then I had 8 channels on the 4710D. So everything was routed through the computer, and I think I was recording in a DAW, but I was using UAD's console app, which you probably can't see that. It looks like that. If you guys are familiar with the UAD ecosystem, I was just kind of controlling things. I had plugins on a couple of things. I'm able to run with pretty close to 0 latency with this stuff. So I had a couple plugins, but most of my effects were going through different effect pedals that were off to the right. So I was routing everything through my system, and then I just took main left and right out. to the house and recorded it in my computer, and that was pretty much it. So I did want to have complete control over each of the voices that I had. I didn't want to rely on mixing totally on the hardware, because one, I felt a lot more comfortable being in the console program, but also I wanted to use this recording, and I wanted to have, I want to be able to manipulate it as best as possible afterwards. So that's how I ended up choosing to route it. So that is how I prepared. I got voices together, I thought through routing, and then ultimately it was just about being there with those dancers and making something interesting. And I think the end result was something really fun and exciting and compelling for the people that were there. So if you want to check this recording out, you are more than welcome to on my Spotify, and also on Bandcamp, and basically anywhere else that you listen to music. Also, I just have to say shout out to Atom Audio. They sponsored this video. I've used Atom Audio. These monitors have been in my studio for a few years now at this point. I absolutely love their stuff, and they ended up sending these headphones actually just before this gig. So I was using these like during the performance when they're getting all their stuff ready. I was over in my little corner with my headphones on, just getting stuff ready for the performance in the second half. So I'm super thankful. I think that these headphones sound incredible. I'm particularly amazed by the clarity of the low end on these guys. So anyways, thanks. Big shout out to Atom Audio. Thanks so much for checking it out. If you made it this far, y'all, have a good one.